Guess who? You missed me? I certainly missed all of you. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, to Meet My Pantheon. If you're clicking on this video, then you know what that means. The 25-26 WSL season is officially underway, and that means, of course, coverage from none other than yours truly on all the happenings that'll be taking place throughout the season in England, in the Women's Champions League, and where applicable, even touching on some interesting things that may be taking place across English borders. But looking on the inside, we begin with the curtain raiser that saw Chelsea welcome Manchester City to Stamford Bridge. The encounter was chock full of fresh faces, from Ellie Carpenter and Sydney Lerman on the pitch to the returning Sam Kerr on the bench. And in the new season came the same old missed opportunities for City, who, under new manager Andre Yeglitz, came close to giving the champions some early headaches but could not capitalize. Whereas on the other hand, Chelsea would not be found wanting, especially with Ellie Carpenter getting off the mark with an assist to Aggie Beaver-Jones, who opened the scoring for the new season to give the Blues the lead. And to their credit, City would fight quite commendably to try and pull themselves back into the game, even as the second half rolled on. But their bluntness in front of goal was glaring for everybody to see and would ultimately be their undoing, in spite of them largely keeping Chelsea quiet, save for a momentary lapse in the second half where some lack of concentration came, and as a good counter from the latter would see the ball land in the back of the net thanks to an unmarked Hamano who gave the champions full control of the encounter. And despite them nicking one back thanks to an unavoidable own goal from Neem Charles, Man City ultimately had nothing to show for what was pretty much all in all quite a good, if not alright, performance, despite the bluntness in attack against the top team in England, who, despite never really looking like they got into the higher gears, still turned out a very good and commendable result, and kicking off their title defense with 3 points in the bag. Saturday's action began and ended with last season's runners-up and Champions League winners Arsenal welcoming ambitious and newly promoted side London City Lionesses to the Emirates Stadium. Both the hosts and league debutants were really up for it, with the latter proving to not want to be taken lightly, as Arsenal's early salvos were expertly called early doors by Kumagai and company, and the same could have been said for Arsenal on the other end, as despite being targeted by Aslani due to her relative inexperience, Gunners starlet Katie Reid held her own incredibly well. But the witness behind her ears would glisten due to an errant tackle in the box on Goodwin that yielded a penalty, which the aforementioned Aslani tucked away to provide a historic first goal for the Lionesses in the top flight, especially in the presence of their matriarch Michelle Kang, who was present at the match. With some much needed jeopardy injected early on, Arsenal were sprang into life and would not wait too long before finding the leveler courtesy of £1 million signing Olivia Smith, who blasted her effort from outside the box into the net to send the home crowd into a frenzy. Such was the exceptional nature of her effort. And before the teams could go down the tunnel for the halftime interval, Arsenal would creep up once again with a very cutesy and well-executed attack pattern that ended with now permanent signing Chloe Kelly poking the ball into the back of the net to give Arsenal the lead. And going into the second half, this second 45 was quite a slog, as neither side really wanted to give much. The Lionesses were sitting back because they didn't want to risk conceding even further against Arsenal, who are now well and truly alive, whereas the Gunners were ruining their chances as they came forward on more than one occasion, and Victoria Pelova and Alicia Russo in particular were found wanting because they did have quite a fair few opportunities to try and make things happen, but unfortunately their finishing was quite erratic. But I guess you can just chalk it up to it being the first game and all that, so some sharpness will definitely come as the game weeks go by. But regardless of that, Arsenal was still in very firm control, and as the game began to reach its conclusion, Arsenal would get their finally deserved buffer goals courtesy of Sina Blackstenius and Frida Monov, who scored literally one after the other to give Arsenal an emphatic and well-deserved 4-1 victory over the London City Lionesses. And the Gunners will definitely have set a mark marker in this opening match of the game week and their league campaign to show that they're very worthy title contenders, and hopefully they will continue to improve on this performance, as it was quite slow and stodgy in certain aspects. But again, this is the beginning of the season, so it's not always going to be a situation where the teams are going to be off to the races. And for the Lionesses, they definitely did give a good account of themselves, but there is definitely a lot of cohesiveness and gelling that needs to take place, as well as some better man management from the manager Jocelyn Pressure, who in my opinion could have done with some fresh legs in defense. Otherwise, I'm sure they would have been much better, especially towards the end against Arsenal, but that's neither here nor there, and ultimately it is something that he and the rest of his team will learn to work with as the season progresses. The rest of the WSL action took place on Sunday with the simultaneous kickoff between all 4 remaining matches, and to be fair, it was quite a mixed bag of results in terms of entertainment, the results themselves between the teams that were playing. And on one hand, we had 2 teams that really went for it and got some entertaining scorelines out of their efforts, and then 2 other teams, well in this case I would rather say matches than teams, that were really plodding, to say it very lightly and fairly and nicely, because the matches weren't really that entertaining. But we'll get to those and the other 2 as well, of which I will begin with the Merseyside Derby, of course, because I think it's just so pertinent to begin there, especially if you know the scoreline, which I'm sure you do. And of course, the Merseyside Derby is Liverpool versus Everton, with Liverpool hosting Everton. And funny enough, just a little bit of symmetry that I noticed, this of course being the first match of the season for these 2 teams, and of course the last match between these 2 teams was the last game of the campaign last season for them, and of course it was at Anfield. So just a nice little bit of symmetry there. Sometimes the football gods can be funny in their own little way. But going towards the match itself, and Liverpool were the live wires early on, as the Reds got themselves a good lead in the 12th minute thanks to a very good effort from Catbox. And in all fairness, they really should have capitalized on that lead, because they had at least 2 to 3 more opportunities before Everton would truly begin to gain their footing in the game to really cement and seal the lead, and ultimately potentially the 3 points. But unfortunately, Gareth Taylor's side were just not clinical enough, apart from that early effort from Catbox, which ultimately they would eventually rue, because as we all know, this match quickly went from the Merseyside Derby to the Vignola show, as of course new signing Aurea Vignola for Everton, she just turned it on and she brought hell on the Reds, and she was merciless at it, with not 1 or 2 but 3 sensational goals from Vignola to give herself not only a very sensational perfect hat-trick, but to give her team the sensational win after a sensational comeback, to just add to what was all in all a very sensational match. And shout out to Vignola in particular, who, especially after her first goal where she beat her defender so effortlessly, she was just in a very satisfying state of flow. Every time that the ball was at her feet, you just had the feeling that something special was about to happen, and the fact that she went on to get herself a perfect hat-trick just helps to accentuate that even more. And also shout out to Katja Schnois, who scored the other goal for Everton, which made it 3 successive Merseyside derbies that she has now scored in. And whilst the result will definitely not flatter the home side and their new manager Gareth Taylor, I think Liverpool can take a little bit of heart in their effort overall. However, they definitely do need to get things back on track, especially after this humiliating defeat at the hands of what was effectively just much better opposition, who were well drilled and better positioned, I guess, to really take the match, and they did so, because Everton, again, they were just that mesmerizing, again, especially Vignola in particular. And I think just based off this performance in particular, Everton are definitely going to be a team to watch out for, and I think it's also going to be interesting to see how far this team can go, especially with their new players, their new manager, and hopefully they can pretty much take inspiration from Brighton last season, but definitely try and push it a little bit further than the Seagulls ultimately did. Of which, speaking of, Brighton welcomed Aston Villa to Broadfield Stadium, where on paper we were definitely somewhat promised quite an entertaining encounter which would have yielded at least a couple of goals. But when it actually came to the game on the field, there really wasn't much in terms of goals, but it wasn't for a lack of trying, because trust me, the likes of Rachel Daly, your Ebony Salmons, your Michelle Ajamangs, Kiko Seike, and even midfielders like Chankovic, they really did try their best to get some goals in the game, but there was a lot of respect that was paid by the respective defenses of Brighton and Aston Villa, as well as the three goalkeepers. Yes, three, because Aston Villa's D'Angelo had to come off for Roebuck due to injury. But the defenders and the goalkeepers, they really did a very good job of keeping out any danger throughout the entirety of the game, which unfortunately did mean that at the end it would be a 0-0, and both teams had to share the spoils in the first encounter of the season for them. But I think overall both teams did perform quite well, but I think as well that they do need to step up their agency, especially in the next few days, as they do have some difficult fixtures coming up. Of course, Aston Villa will be facing Chelsea this coming weekend, and Brighton will be facing Manchester City. So definitely some tall orders to ask for from both teams in terms of playing to a high degree, especially against respective opposition. But I do think that there definitely can be something done just going off of this performance alone. But ultimately, looking at this game, it was quite drab in the end, especially given that there were no goals and we were just teased, to be fair. But the defenses were pretty solid, as well as the goalkeepers, so it's interesting to see if this will translate into next week's fixtures. And just to get the other plotting affair out of the way, we had Tottenham Hotspur take on West Ham United at Spurs' home ground, Brisbane Road. And I think the Lily Whites will definitely count themselves lucky to have come out on top, because all things considered, West Ham were the better of the two sides, and Vivian Asseyi and Shakira Martinez, amongst others, will definitely feel hard done by the result, especially after the very good performances that they put in respectively for their side. But as we all know in football, not only is it a cruel mistress, but the only thing that matters at the end of the day is the number of balls that you put into the back of the net. Unless of course you support Manchester United, but I'm not going to judge. Regardless of that, looking at the game in totality, I think West Ham definitely should have come away with something, at least a point at least, because they were very good going forward and defensively. Tottenham really couldn't find an answer for them apart from just keeping the ball, but even then it wasn't for long periods of time, and the likes of Beth England and Jessica Naz, who are usually on point for their sides, were just not there. And I don't know what it was. Maybe again it's the age-old excuse of it being the first game of the week, but at the same time they really got away with murder, because it came down to very fine margins and fortune shining bright on the Lily Whites on this occasion, because there was somewhat of a coming together, I will call it that, between Ribrick and Gorey, which did yield a penalty to the Lily Whites, with none other than Beth England putting it away to seal all 3 points for Tottenham. And again, like I said, West Ham will definitely feel hard done by, while Tottenham will count themselves lucky for getting the 3 points, especially with a little bit of luck and razzle-dazzle mixed in there for them. But the Hammers can take heart in their valiant efforts, and of course Spurs will definitely look to improve and bounce back in light of their performance against West Ham. And finally, we had another goal fest, this time in the form of Manchester United versus Leicester City, and Leicester City's very woeful form away from home continues into the new season, as the Foxes were hammered by the Red Devils 4-0, with Ella Toone, Elizabeth Turland, and Melvin Mallard, the latter with a brace, coming up clutch to seal a very emphatic and encouraging victory for their side against the very hapless Leicester side, who, just based on this one performance alone, you just gotta wonder what is happening. Are Leicester okay? Do they need a little bit more innovation, motivation when it comes to playing away from home, because their current form is deplorable. According to Opta Joe, I think it's about 17 matches that they've now gone without a win away from home, which is very concerning. And given that there is going to be some changes to the WSL coming next season, the Foxes need to find some very good away form before it's too late. Otherwise, they'll be finding themselves back in the championship. And whereas for current Champions League hopefuls, Manchester United, they will definitely use this nice good bit of form that they've got to not only propel the rest of their season, but also their final few hurdles before seeing Champions League qualification, hopefully. And I think, just again, based on this performance alone, Manchester United are definitely building up from their performances last season, and I think just maybe they could be within an earshot of being proper title challengers. At least one team from Manchester has to be that, right? So hopefully it's Man U, because this performance was very professional, very entertaining, and very energetic, and I think the Red Devils will definitely be another thorn in the side on the upper end of things. And with that final match being recapped, game week number 1 of the WSL is officially wrapped up and in the books, and a lot of positives and excitement for the teams across the WSL, especially if they were on the winning side of things, especially if you're a Man U fan, well, of course the women's team, not the men's team, but anyway, looking at the overall performance of teams across the board, I think this was another great advertisement for the WSL and the new season and what it's got in store for all of us who will be watching it. But I do think there needs to be a lot of improvement for some of the teams that didn't manage to get a positive result, particularly in my view, Brighton and Aston Villa. But as we can see from their performance last season, they're definitely capable of performing at a much higher level. So it's okay, I guess it's just early doors, so I won't be too critical on them particularly. But where I will definitely be critical is with regards to the WSL broadcasters. If you go on Twitter right now, there are a lot of complaints about the poor service delivery by the different broadcast partners of the WSL. Personally, I watch my games from YouTube, and this was just a struggle to watch some of these matches, whether it was the Arsenal game that kept cutting in and out, or the delayed audio that wasn't in sync with what was happening on screen. The problems are endless, and I could go on and on to list them, but unfortunately this video is already quite long as it is, so I don't want to keep you for too long. But otherwise, it was a good week of women's football action in England. Of course, other leagues have already started up, like Liga F and the Frauen Bundesliga, and then of course the NWSL, who, by the way, their chain got snatched by WSL clubs, with more of their talent being picked off. Of course, as you can see at the beginning of the video, Alyssa Thompson has signed for Chelsea, which sounds like Chelsea already have a lot of good quality players already, but again, neither here nor there. But anyway, I rambled long enough. Thank you all so much for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye for now.